Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 577. This program is in loving memory of Miriam Baselio, Altez Allah Shalom, and Emerita Baruch ben Yamin ben Menucha Lana Altez, Yukasil ben Leah Rachel and Rachel Basli Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Tadris ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rachel Altez. We are at the end of the month of Tevis, and just benched Shabbos Mavarchim yesterday, the month of Shevat, which will be this week, Rosh Shevat. So, fittingly, let's begin with that. Chodesh Shevat, we'll talk about the parsha of this week, Parshas Boy, being that this month of Shevat has, of course, the day of Yud Shevat, as well as Chov Bei Shevat, and Chamisha Osa B'Shvat. You can say above all because it precedes them all, Rosh Hashanah Le'Elonis. So we have a number of things to speak about, but I'll focus mostly on the matters of this week, namely Rosh Chodesh Shvat, Parshas Boy, and we have the coming weeks to talk about the other days in Shvat. So, let's begin. Chassidus Applied is about applying Chassidus, Torah, Meloshen Heirah to our personal lives. That is the ultimate focus. The Rebbe, more than any other expression, Torah Meloshen Heirah. It's a directive, it's a guide. It's a guide to life. Heirah B'chaim. A blueprint for life. With that, let me mention ChassidusApplied.com is our website, where you can find all previous programs and many other resources, and of course, a forum where you can submit any question. Nothing is off limits, nothing is taboo. And that's where all the questions that I read and try to respond to come from that forum. So please take advantage of that and use it well, and I thank those that have asked questions and continue to ask questions. So what is the significance of this month, and what should be the main focus of our avodah in this time? So every month has its unique energy, just like we say kol yema v'yema avodah vidita. Every day has its energy, has its service, has its focus. So it is with months. As we read actually in this week's parsha, we're going to read about HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem, the significance of a month. This another structure of time, a critical one that defines the lunar cycle, which is the Hebrew Jewish calendar. So what exactly is the significance of the month of Shvat? So firstly, we know every month has its mazal. The Gemara talks about the Yud Beis Mazalis corresponding to the Yud Beis Shvatim, to the 12 Yud Beis Shvatim, as well as the Yud Beis Chadoshim, the 12 months. What is the mazal of Chodesh Shvat? Is deli. Deli is a pail, a bucket. It's interesting, in the English version, it's called Aquarius. If you look up the translation of Aquarius, the original is a water carrier. Whereas deli means actually a pail, a bucket, not just the carrier. But obviously they're connected with each other. So what's the connection and what's the lesson to us? So what is the union of a deli, a bucket? A bucket is a keli. Chassidus explains a keli is bittel. Bittel means it's a recipient. Klei reikon, an empty keli, is able to retain and contain whatever you place within it. In the language of Chassidisha language, the oiris in the kelim, an oir in a keli. A student is a klei reikon, is an empty container, as he's able to absorb and retain that which his teacher teaches him. And in truth, this is, in general, avodas Hashem. When a person is not focused on themselves and their own self-interest and needs, and they're focused on inavreisi l'shamish keni. I was created to serve my Creator, my nest, my Maker, the Eibishter. That is being a keli. You are becoming a channel to fulfill what your mission in life is. So Shevat captures, Shvat, the month of Shvat, I should say, captures this very essence of being a bucket. Now, the fact that sometimes we refer to it as a water carrier, and even in the Hebrew, you'll find places that it's because a human being is supposed to become like the bucket. So as a water carrier, you're carrying water, or whatever it is, the energies that you contain. Which is very fitting, because the month of Shevat, we know, starting from the Torah itself, Moshe Rabbeinu, the first Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu, when did he begin? Sefer Dvarim. When did he begin to share and speak about the last 37 days of his life as a Rebbe, as a leader? The Chodesh Shevat, as the Sefer Dvarim begins, and the first day of this 11th month of Shevat, and concluded on Zayin Adar when Moshe's Hilula Histalkus. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe Ya'onu Mekol Adam Asher Al Pnei Adam, he was the humblest, because he was the bucket, he was a channeler of the divine word. Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, Moshe received the Torah from Sinai. And that's a lesson to each one of us. So it's not surprising that in this month you have the Hilula and Histalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Der Ashishi, the sixth Nasi of Hasidic Chabad, and of course the assumption of the Rebbe's leadership, the seventh generation, right there in that, and Yud Shvat. That's the union of a Rebbe. A Rebbe is a klei makabel, a transparent channel, what Chassidus calls a mamutza machaber, like Moshe Rabbeinu, ben Nechem, ben Hashem Elokeichem, a transparent channel, a role model, and an example of what is Elokus in this world. And we, each of us, have through the virtue of our neshama, the mission to be as much as possible the same. That we're not speaking our own words, we're not using our legs and arms become Amrakovet le'elokus. Now, of the others, Heinen Amrakovet, they were 24/7 that way. Each of us has to aspire to that. So that's lesson number one when it comes to the month of Shvat, the union of Bittul. What does the word Shvat itself mean? So Shvat is mentioned in Zechariah, the beginning of Zechariah, Kapitel Aleph, Pasuk Zayin. So there it says the 11th month, but he says the month of Shvat. So generally, the way the commentaries explain, Shvat means also, Shevat also means like a rod. A rod strikes. So why is it called this month? Because this was the rainy season when there were the heavy rains, so they would strike below, like lashes. So on one hand, that's a negative. On the other hand, it shows on an intensity. Because the fact of the matter is, and this I've not seen anywhere, but perhaps you can explain what it says about Gevurah. Chassidus explains, Gevurah on one hand is tzimtzum, concealment, and it's discipline and din, but Gevurah also is tagburas achayis. When you channel something in a very concentrated way, which is the idea of Gevurah, it's tagburas achayis. It creates a tremendous intensity. So the bittul of the month of Shvat, of the deli, of the bucket, of the keli, not only does it not diminish, it actually creates a channel. That's why the keli is mamshich the as Chassidus says. That when you're powerful makabel, the makabel draws even more than the eir itself has on its own. That's why we say mitalmidei yeser mekulam. That from my students I learn most, even more than from my colleagues and more than from my teachers. Because the student reaches the deepest through the bittul, that reaches the deepest levels, like it says in Chassidus about the tzimtzum. We'll talk about it a little later, Basi L'Gani, in the hemshech of Basi L'Gani, Yud Shvat, that the tzimtzum, concealment, takes more energy than revelation. And that, in a sense, is the paradox of the month of Shvat. And the lesson is very clear. We live lives, we take care of our own selves. Shvat teaches us to remind us that we have to be a keli, a bucket, for something greater than ourselves. And we have to channel it to everyone we meet. And what are we channeling? Torah, Chassidus, Ein Mayim Ela Torah. The eir of Torah, the eir of Chassidus, through the keli that each of us provides. But if the keli is not there, or it's somewhat not completely receptive, it won't flow. Okay. With that, let us go straight into Chodesh Shvat is the Rosh of this month. So Rosh, like Rosh Hashanah, not just Tchilas HaChodesh, Rosh is like a head that contains everything that will be coming throughout this month. According to Shammai, Rosh Chodesh Shvat is also Rosh Hashanah Le'Elonis. The halacha is like Basi L'Gani that it's on Chamisha Osir B'Shvat, the 15th of Shvat. So Rosh Chodesh Shvat is also the Rosh Hashanah Le'Elonis, which, if you think about the growth of vegetation, also captures this idea. It all begins with a seed bittel, and that seed has to deteriorate in the ground in order to grow into a powerful, beautiful tree. So now let us go over to Parshas Boy. Parshas Boy, what lessons do we learn from living with the times with this week's Torah parsha? So Parsha Boy is an interesting, talk about paradox, an interesting paradox as well. The first part of the Parsha talks about the end of Golus Mitzrayim, but not just the end, the darkest of the dark. The last plagues, including Makas Cheshach and Makas B'cheres. But then in the middle of the Parsha, suddenly things turn around. It's when Hashem finally says to Moshe, takes him outside, shows him HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. Look up into the heavens. See, the new moon, this will be your new moon. The new moon of the Jewish people. You will count. Rishon hu lachem l'chodshei hashana will be the beginning of your new year, signifying also renewal, the beginning of a new period in time. And like the moon, a new moon. She'em asidin l'schadish kameis, a renewal. And indeed continues to describe that on the 15th day of this month, Chodesh Nisan, there will be the Geula, be'etzem hayom hazeh, the Yidden will go out of Mitzrayim. And that's what happens. Which is interesting because you think about it, makes more sense. Finish Golus Mitzrayim at the end of last parsha or a separate parsha with the last of the 10 plagues. And Pari finally says, okay, now you can go. And that should be beginning a new parsha. No, in the same parsha's boy, you have the darkest of the dark, but you also have the birth, the dawn. Which tells us something which we discussed a few weeks ago, what the Ramban calls the whole Sefer Shmei, Sefer HaGeula. But it's not the whole Sefer, it's not Sefer HaGeula. For 2.5 chapters, Shmois Vaeirah and half of Parsha Boy are about Golus Mitzrayim. Because the whole purpose of the Golus, the Yerida, is the Tzedach Aliyah. Like it says, Ve'elu Shmeis B'nei Yisrael. Habayim Mitzrayim, the reason they came there was in order to leave Mitzrayim. It wasn't an end in itself. The Tzimtzum is B'shvil HaGili. The concealment is in order to bring out even more strength and more power and create and forge a powerful new nation. So the whole Sefer is really Geula. It's just in Geula itself, there's the stages. Like when we say Geula, Geula, same word. Geula cannot exist without Geula. So to have Geula, you need Geula. Then you add the Aleph of Alufa Shalelim, of the divine, of Achdus, of the master of the universe. Then it turns Geula into Geula. So therefore in Parsha Bo you have both to emphasize this point. It's not like 2 stages. It's really all part of one process, one journey, one narrative, which teaches us tremendous lessons in our own lives. You have to look at your life as a journey, like a turning wheel, as the Rebbe Rashab said, a galgal hachezer. Even when things seem dark, a setback may seem down, the wheel will continue to turn. And it's all part of one turn. It's all part of one journey. So it's a tremendous lesson in our lives, and it's indeed the lesson that helped Jews survive, not just survive, thrive through any challenges. So that's the most obvious lesson. But there are other questions that came in about the Parsha. What does it mean? So I mentioned Makas Cheshach, the 9th plague. Total Egypt was enveloped and completely covered up in darkness, but it says L'chol b'nei Yisrael haya'er b'mishveisam. And to all the Jews there was light in their community, in their dwellings. What does it mean that during the plague of darkness there was light among the Jews? So the simple meaning is the darkness, only affected the Egyptians. That was the whole point, not the Yid. But clearly it means a lot more than that. Many, many levels of symbolism and significance. So Rashi and from the Psukim, it's clear that this also allowed the Jews to see all the belongings of the Egyptians that they would take with them when they would leave Mitzrayim, which was not just a schar, reward for all the torture and all the slavery that they had imposed up in Eden. It was also in of birurim, that they are redeeming and freeing the sparks that were left in Mitzrayim. So they needed light to see that. But if you think in the broader sense of the word, it means that even when darkness affects the rest of the world, know that when you're connected to God, you're connected to God's will. And here the people, the Jewish people, had suffered greatly. Light will be with you, even when there's darkness around you. We look in the world today, obviously a very different world than back then. But still there are plenty of darkness, whether it's in moral confusion that exists, whether it's the polarization, whether it's the ignorance, whether it's the nonsense that people are involved in, the selfishness, the corruption. But the parsha is telling us, this pasuk is telling us, that doesn't mean you can't have light in your life. Even if you have not yet changed the world, which is also part of our responsibility, and we'll discuss in a moment. You can have complete light. Come Shabbos, you light Shabbos candles. Doesn't matter what's going on in the world around you. Now you have a taste of Me'ein Elam Haba, a taste of the future, a taste of Mashiach, a taste of Geula, Mashiach, Shabbos and Menucha. Yem Shekuli Shabbos and Menucha L'chai Elomim. Every Shabbos is a taste of that. And every day in the week, when you learn Torah, you mekayim a mitzvah, you're davening, you help another person. You're creating light even if around you there's darkness. So you're not a victim or a product of any circumstances around you. There can be darkness. And there was good reason there was darkness. The Egyptians deserved darkness. That's what they brought into the world, darkness, slavery, torture, genocide. So another person asks, why did that light not dispel the surrounding darkness? We know according to Chassidus that even a small amount of light pushes off darkness. So if it was light among the Jews, how is it possible that there was any darkness amongst their Egyptian neighbors? Brought in a number of places, including in Tanya, chapter 12, and other places. So it's an interesting question, but think about it. It's two stages. The first thing is when darkness descends upon the world, like we say, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem covers the earth, and Arofel, a cloud, a dark cloud, L'umim, the nations. So that was brought on by human beings. Starting from the Chet Tzadas, as he explains in Basi L'Gani, that concealed the divine, and then the Chatoim that came afterwards. The same thing both individually and collectively. We bring darkness upon ourselves, unfortunately. So the first thing is, the Eibishter says, okay, now you have the power, Vayhi Oyer. Taka, the world was created in the beginning, it was Cheshach al Pnei HaTehem. The Spirit of God, which is the Ruach Shel Mashiach, hovered. But then comes Vayir, that's the mitzvah, bring Oyer. Avram Avinu began to bring light into the world, as the Rambam explains in the beginning of Laws of Avodah Zarah. And as he explains in Basi L'Gani, after the 7 generations of the descent, meaning of the concealment, Avram began to bring the Shekhinah down from the 7th Rekiah heaven to the 6th, until Moshe, the 7th generation, brought it down Lamato V'Shachanti B'Seichem. Initially, yes, first there's light, but ultimately the goal of the light is, of course, to dispel the darkness. But at this point, that was not the goal. The goal, this was a makkah, remember. This was a punishment. This was a wake-up call. Cause and effect of what the Egyptians had done. It was meant that they should, you brought darkness into the world. Here, you're going to experience darkness. The Jews will have light. Ultimately, our goal is to transform the cheshech also around us. Not just In other words, not just in our own homes and our environments, to bring that light to the rest of the world. Chanukah, which we come from last month. Al Pesach Beis Mibachutz. First you light the Al Pesach Beis, but it's Mibachutz. It starts illuminating the world around us. But let's not confuse matters. It's stages. You can't just conquer the Fasta Meruba Leita Fasta. Ma'at Agarshena. It's a step-by-step process. And then, yes, light will ultimately be Cheshech Atzmei Yoyer, Chassidus says. And as the Nevuah say about that, it will be the light, the darkness will turn Laila Kiyem Yoyer. Darkness will shine like light. But that's already the process after the avodah that we do. But we have the power to do so right now, to bring light, firstly, into our lives, into our homes, into our communities, and that light will then be mispashet, like the light of the menorah. Many Yetzirah, light will reach and be a lagoyim. So it will illuminate the cheshech chasa'aretz v'arofa le'umim, the darkness around us. Okay, why did Pharaoh survive the plague of the firstborn? Since he himself was a firstborn, how did he survive it? There's a medrash that says that he did manage to escape and move to Nineveh and later became king there. Well, it's a little more details than that. The answer is very straightforward, and it says it befedish in Midrashim. Hashem wanted, the whole purpose of the plagues was it wasn't just to get even with the Egyptians. It was to break the klippah and to show them and reveal godliness. Unfortunately, it had to come with a lot of pain, because they were very resistant. It was a very, very difficult klippah to break, like he explains in Tanya chapter 29. Sometimes the klippah is so strong the fire won't catch. The wood is resistant, so you have to break it down. Pharaoh was the head, the king, of course, of the whole of Mitzrayim. The Eibishter wanted him to see what's happening. He wasn't interested in just killing him. So he saved Pharaoh to see what's going on, even though he was a firstborn. Same thing happened by Kriyas Yamsuf. Pharaoh saw. He did not drown, because he wanted him to learn the lesson and bring it back. Later he goes to Nineveh. It's another story, what continues happening with Pharaoh. But it was that Pharaoh should see that's the ultimate goal, not just to destroy, but to transform. So that's the basic reason. As we've been discussing, the whole point is transformation of the world. Okay. Why did the Exodus begin with the mitzvah of HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem, establishing a lunar-based calendar? And why was this the first commandment in Torah? So it's a two-part question. It's a good question when you read it. Yes, it's a nice opening to the events that would happen. But as I alluded to before, if you think about it, it's very clear. Firstly, the Eibishter was showing him the concept of renewal. HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. What does HaChodesh means? The word chiddush. That's what HaChodesh, chiddush. Till now, the Jews were enslaved by Egypt. There's going to be a new light coming into the world. A new nation will be born. And I created something in this world to remind you every month of this. The moon. The moon goes through its cycles. It waxes and it wanes until it disappears, and then it's born again. Leida, it's called a birth. The Meilad, the birth of the moon. So look, I'll show you. With your physical eyes. And it's also showing us today, every time you look up at the moon. It's the same moon that Moshe Rabbeinu saw over 3,300 years ago. To be exact, 3,338 years ago. The exact same moon. So even when there's setbacks and even when there's darkness, no, the moon will be reborn. But this wasn't just a natural event. The Eibishter said this becomes a mitzvah. You will sanctify the moon. And you are compared to the moon. We count by the moon. And we're compared daimim l'levana. We're similar, we go through these cycles. And this becomes the Chodesh HaGeula. Rishon hu lechem l'chodesh hashana, Chodesh Nisan, Chodesh HaGeula. And 2 weeks from now, when the moon will be full, now it's being born. When the moon will be full, that's when you will march out of Mitzrayim be'etzem hayom hazeh. And that's why it's also the first mitzvah, because it captures the very idea of what mitzvahs are. Well, you say, what do you mean the first mitzvah? Isn't Frumer Vaeirah the first mitzvah? Look at Rashi in the beginning of Chumash. He asked this question, why does the Torah not begin with HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem? Because this is the first mitzvah as the people are becoming a Jewish people. Frumer Vaeirah is a general mitzvah to the entire human race. Bris, to Avram Avinu, obviously is also a mitzvah. But HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem is the collective first mitzvah. Where Moshe is being told, as he's building a nation, the Jewish people. That's the general explanation. Chodesh Hazeh Lochem. But he doesn't begin with that because of the explanation Rashi gives. And it's Lochem, to you, that this chiddush will be experienced by you every month, and the truth is all the time. As the Medrash says, that when the Eibishter created the world, he gave them he designated for them years and months. But when he gave them the Geula, Chodesh HaGeula, that's when they took them out of Mitzrayim, I should say. When he brought Geula to the world, he was kevei to them the Chodesh HaGeula. So the creation of existence was there from the beginning of Bereshis. Now we have the ability of Geula, chiddush, to create in this world that it's not just a natural cycle, to create newness, something that is unprecedented, something transcendent. Okay. What was the significance of offering the Pascal Lamb, and what was the process? So, in the continuing parsha, as Hashem is telling him about HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem, he also talks to him about the Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach was a unique korban that was brought to commemorate and to celebrate the Geula, and it would be so every year after that, time of the Beis Hamikdash. Today we don't have a Korban Pesach because there's no Beis Hamikdash. We have a zecher to it, but it represents that. Now the lamb, there's many different reasons why a lamb. Some say it's the avodah zarah of Mitzrayim, so that's why it was transformed into Geula. There's explanations that it's a very docile creature, expressing the idea of bittul, which is critical in the Geula. But the point is, korbanos in general, is meloshen kiruv, closeness. And here every family was designated, was given the mitzvah. And that was much associated with the whole idea of getting closer and elevating and transcending, like Yetzias Mitzrayim indicates, to go out of Mitzarim v'Gvulim, to go out of our limitations and our constraints. So the Korban Pesach represents that. Someone asked the process, why in the parsha is everyone commanded to slaughter a lamb for the Korban Pesach when one person can't eat an entire lamb? Usually one lamb can be shared with 20 or more people, and therefore only one person in the group is able to slaughter it. So here you go to Hilchos Pesach. The Rambam in detail, based on the Gemara, says exactly all the details of this, that every family, it was Ein Lechel El Lemnuyav, you had to appoint groups. And there's a whole process of how big the group has to be, and they have to slaughter it for the entire group, because most people cannot eat one lamb. If someone's going to slaughter himself, it says actually that he has to be able to eat it. That's why in most cases it was not done that way. So Pesach, as the Rambam says, was a unique korban. It was both a korban yachid in some ways and a korban tzibur. It was a korban tzibur because all the people did it, but a korban yachid because every family, unique family, had to do it. It wasn't just a korban tzibur for the entire Jewish nation. So both represented individual freedom and collective freedom, in brief. Okay. Remember, Pesach also comes from the word posach, to leap over. Medalag ala harim, mekapetz ala gvos. The idea of leaping, again, a chiddush, usually you walk regularly, that's a regular seder ishtalshus, the general cosmic order. But leaping reflects a leap, a transcendent experience that's beyond the natural. And that's what created the Chodesh Hazeh Lochem. The chiddush of a new nation that would now soon be ready to be Mekabel the Torah, Kabbalah Satera, which would bring a whole new Chodesh, whole new unprecedented divine possibilities in this world to transform this world, the very physical world, into a Chefsa Shel Kedusha, into a holy sacred place. V'shachanti b'seichem, a place where God resides and dwells in the very physical objects, every fiber of this physical existence. How can we benefit today from the fact that the Jews left Egypt with great wealth? So we know, as Avraham Avinu was promised, that after all the difficulties will be Bnei Yisrael Yetzu B'Yad Rama, but B'Rechush Gadol. They'll go out B'Rechush Gadol with great wealth. So someone asked the question, in Parsha Bo, it says we left exile in Egypt with tremendous wealth. It says in other places that the same things that happened during Exodus of Egypt will happen during the final Geula. Correct? How can we take advantage of this today during the days of Mashiach's imminent arrival? True in general that our communities are much wealthier today than we were living in when living in poverty in Eastern European shtetls, and I'm grateful for that. But my personal life, my old car leaks oil and is not so safe to drive anymore. I want Hashem to buy me a new car. It doesn't have to be a Cadillac, just something safe and reliable, so I don't have to worry and have stress. And I can occupy my time with Torah and mitzvahs instead of looking for tow trucks. What is something I can do today to receive this blessing? Okay. As you see, some of these come in very unfiltered and uncensored. People just writing from their hearts. I guess they feel comfortable, especially they don't sign their name. So, the beginning was talking a little more, I guess, in the broader terms. Well, everything comes down practically, obviously. So the wealth, they did leave with actual physical wealth. But we know, as the Alter Rebbe says, as the Eibishter gibt der Yiden Gashmis, und von Gashmis macht man Ruchnis. And we're given Gashmis, a lot of wealth. And the goal is to turn that into Ruchnis. The Yidden leaving Mitzrayim, business Mitzrayim, then business Hayam, the wealth was not just to make them wealthy that they can buy cars. There were no cars then, whatever, donkeys, camels. But the point was that they should use the wealth for Kedusha, to build a Mishkan. So I would just add that into the equation. But it's also physical wealth. In Yiddishkeit, physical wealth is a bracha. Ashiris is a bracha. So everybody should be blessed with wealth. And especially after what they went through, as they were afflicted and oppressed, they thrived, they blossomed. So it included also Rechush Gadol, coming away, and as Chassidus explains, also with the sparks. Reish Beis, Erev Rav Ole Imam. Rav is 202 divine sparks of the 288 sparks. 202 were taken with the wealth that they left forth from Mitzrayim. So it's gathering divine sparks from everywhere we go, which of course is to be used to create a Dira B'Tachtenim, a home for the divine in this world. But again, it comes with the blessings, and indeed, I'm glad you acknowledge that today we have a prosperity and a comfort that we never had before. But still, Yidden need brachas, and the Yidden that do need a bracha, parsha begashmis, ashiris begashmis. So Birch headed that I'm offering that, and especially we read in this week's parsha, like you said, Kemet Seis Chemeretz Mitzrayim. So whatever happened then, even more so now, that everyone should be blessed with ashiris begashmis and barchava, bona chayim mezeinu revicha. And you should turn the Gashmis into Ruchnis and show the Eibishter that this day Rashvi, as Basi L'Gani continues, just like time of Moshe Rabbeinu, that we will finish the work, 7th generation from the Alter Rebbe, and in the Gula Amitis Vashleim, in the building of the Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi, and transform the material and the wealth of this world, and all its technology, and all the breakthroughs, and all the advancements into a home for the divine. Because Kol Mashabara Kodesh Baruch Hu Ba'elam Elibara El Lechvede. All of it was created to bring more Gili Elikus, more divine awareness and consciousness into our lives and to the lives of every person on this earth. So before we go to Shevat and Basi L'Gani, which many questions, many points around that. I want to just do one follow-up with last week's parsha, the Frumer Vaeirah. So we spoke about the maamar of the Alter Rebbe, the Frumer Vaeirah. So the question was, what's the story behind the maamar? So I brought from Torah Shalom, but I have to say I neglected, it was just to slip my mind. But thank you for reminding me. And I've always asked everyone you're listening to this program, anything that you feel that either you want to add or something you are aware of that I did not mention, please. I feel that as an honor. I don't feel it as anything disrespectful, God forbid. On the contrary, I find it great that we have a platform that we can all contribute. And if you have any insight or sikha or maamar or something that you'd like to add to what is being discussed, by all means, please just share it again at chiddush.com. So someone wrote, I only tuned in partially during the segment where you were discussing the Frumer Vaeirah. Not sure if you mentioned the Hayem of this week's Hashgacha Prat is Beis Shevat. Mamish Beis Shevat, right after the HaChodesh Shevat. Yeshakir Gadol, ala fotzes ha-chsidus v'chulu. So what did we read? Well, let's read Hayem. So he's talking, he's writing, he said, the Rebbe brought Hayem as everything from the Frierdiker Rebbe. So on Beis Shevat, just this thing, why Beis Shevat, that we can discuss. But it's connected to usually Pasha Vaeirah. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, my father Rebbe Rashab related, the maamar Vaeirah, Ushmi Hashem, discussing the idea that none of them will be repelled. He says clearly it's not the maamar with this title and printed in Torah, as we pointed out, it's the Torah Lemberg was printed, but not the Torah in our. So it said, acquired the name the Frumer Vaeirah. The reason was, as we discussed from Torah Shalom, because it awakened in people a very strong passion and reverence. The Alter Rebbe would repeat it every 3 years, this maamar. Each time, almost verbatim. Tzemach Tzedek said, each time there was a new light. My father commented, meaning the Rebbe Rashab, oil light is always the same, but more luminary is always like something new. So being that the Alter Rebbe said it as a moir, a source of light, it was always something new. So it's interesting that even though it was the same maamar, always with a new light, a new energy. Okay, so that just fills in that element about the Frumer Vaeirah. Now let us move on to, being that this is going to be Shabbos, this is the HaChodesh Shevat this week. A week from now, Yud Shevat will be next week, on Tuesday next week. We will talk about that because there's plenty to discuss. I'm sure some of it will spill over to next week's My Life program. So let's begin. So first of all, let's just describe the mechanics of this. Yud Shevat, we know, Tovshin Yud, the Shabbos Pasha Boy, that year Yud Shevat was Shabbos. In the morning, close to 8:30 in the morning, was the sad Istalkus Hilula of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe led Chabad, the 6th generation, for 30 years. He assumed leadership in Tafresh Pei, Beis Nissen after the Rebbe Rashab's Istalkus. And it went till, so Tafresh Pei is like 1920, till 1950, Yud Shevat, Tovshin Yud. The Rebbe, our Rebbe, immediately assumes leadership, not formally for another year. The Rebbe rejected it for all the different reasons. So a year later, Tovshin Yud Aleph, the Rebbe would say Basi L'Gani, without officially assuming the leadership. But Chassidim already treated the Rebbe as the new Rebbe, in asking for brachas and pans and different things. But the Rebbe was still resistant to some extent. But in Tovshin Yud Aleph, that's when it became formal. So Yud Shevat marks the day, the anniversary of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Hilula, and also the anniversary of Bo HaShemesh v'Zarach HaShemesh, the rise of the Rebbe, the 7th generation, as the Rebbe lays out in that Basi L'Gani maamar Tovshin Yud Aleph. So Yud Shevat's a day that we dedicate and we commit to the Rebbe and to all the Rebbe's teachings and activities. This program wouldn't exist without it, so it would be quite a miss of me not to discuss it. Not that I need an excuse, I'm just stating that for the record, because it set in motion everything that would come afterwards. So everything we see today from the Rebbe's pu'ulas and contributions all begins Yud Shvat, with the koyach, of course, of the Frierdiker Rebbe and all the Rabbeim before. And we see that in the Maimorim. As the Rebbe said, the maamar Basi L'Gani, this became the magnum opus, this became the classic, that every year the Rebbe would say Basi L'Gani maamar on Yud Shvat. And as became apparent over the years, after a year or two, that was realized that the 20 chapters of Basi L'Gani, which is the maamar, consists of 20 chapters, 4 different maimorim, each one with 5 chapters, a series of 4 maimorim. The first was released, Yud Shvat, second right away, Yud Gimel Shvat. Those were the first 10 chapters. Then one came out for Purim, a kuntris, and then finally for Beis Nisan, the final kuntris of the last 5 and the last 10 chapters of those 2 kuntresim, respectively. So every year the Rebbe would say a maamar. He would start with Basi L'Gani, review everything to the point, and then focus on the corresponding chapter. So the first year, Tafshin Yud Aleph, was primarily focused on chapter 1. Tafshin Yud Beis, chapter 2. Tafshin Yud Gimel, chapter 3. When it came Tafshin Lamed, it was chapter 20. Okay, what would happen Tafshin Lamed Aleph? Nobody knew. And the Rebbe began again the cycle. So ever since Chassidim know that this Basi L'Gani, you learn the chapter, the whole Basi L'Gani, but especially the chapter corresponding. So where are we now? We're in chapter 16 for the 4th time, because it's 66 years since, well, it's not 66, I'm sorry, from Tafshin Yud till now, we're in Tafshin Pei Vav, is 86 years, 85 years from Tafshin Yud Aleph. Bottom line is, in Tafshin Chavav, 1966, the Rebbe said, a maamar explaining chapter 16. In 1986, the Rebbe said it again. A different explanation, a different take. So then 1986, then 2006 would be the 3rd cycle, and now 2026 would be the 4th cycle. So the 4th time that we're learning is chapter 16 in this order. So this is the focus. So we're learning the maamar from Tafshin Chavav, maamar of Tafshin Memvav. And there were some other maimorim the Rebbe said that were related to it, and of course in the Rebbe Sichos. So if you really want to prepare for Yud Shvat, so besides the letter that the Rebbe wrote, how to prepare for Yud Shvat in Torah, avodah, gemilas chassadim, the Rebbe wrote an entire letter, how to celebrate that day, how to honor that day. But there's also the learning of Basi L'Gani, as the Rebbe mentions, and especially the corresponding chapter. But anything you add in learning the Rebbe's Torah and implementing the Rebbe's campaigns, mitzvahim, and avodah, of course, is the best possible way. What better way to honor a day like Yud Shvat? Being that we are now a week and a half before that, so the truth is the Rebbe would emphasize sometimes to start 30 days before. But at least in the 15 days, it's less than 15 days by now. It's almost. So we should begin preparing in every possible way. With that said, there's a bunch of questions that came in. So I'll try to cover some of them with the time allowed, and the rest I'll leave for next week. Can you give us a summary of this year's chapter 16 of Basi L'Gani? Dear Rabbi Jacobson, somebody writes, and I got a few letters like this. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, recently you gave a lecture at Alter Rebbe about this year's chapter of Basi L'Gani. Unfortunately, there were some technical difficulties during the live broadcast. Would you be willing to give a 5-minute synopsis during your Sunday night podcast of the main points of the maamar? Thank you. So indeed, a week ago Thursday, I should say, I did give a share in the Alter Rebbe. It is online. We have actually a special section if you go to chassidussupply.com/Yud Shvat, I believe. You'll find the whole section, and you'll find a link to that class. So Most of it is there, but because of some of the glitches, you can't really tell, but I could tell. And someone really listens closely, you could tell that there are parts that was a low, no excuses, low bandwidth, Wi-Fi. Doesn't matter. Bottom line is there are pieces missing. So I will give a summary, but I appreciate your sharing that. So briefly as we can, the Hemshech, Basi L'Gani, you can divide into, as I said, it's 4 maamorim, 5 chapters each. But I'm going to break it into two parts. The first 10 chapters and the last 10 chapters. The first 10 chapters lay out in a very central way, which of course is all Hashgacha Al-Yena, because the maamar, every maamar covers all of life. But this maamar particularly, you see it very obvious. You see it covers the very mission for which we were sent to this world, which fits right into the Rebbe speaking about the mission of the Deira Shvi. So the first 10 chapters covers exactly that God created the world, and the Shekhinah was here below, Basi L'Gani. Doesn't say L'Gan, L'Gani, L'Gnuni. But due to the human sins, what does a sin do? Avodah from Lashon displacement. It conceals, so the Shekhinah became concealed, generation after generation. Till Avraham Avinu came and reversed the process, began to bring light into the world again. Cleaning up the pipes of the world, to realign it back to the way it was in Gan Eden, B'Kedem, before the Chet Eitzadas. And then subsequently, the generations after Avram continued, Yitzchak, Yaakov, all the way to the 7th generation. From Avram is Moshe Rabbeinu. He, of course, Yitzias Mitzrayim, Matan Torah, and the building of the Mishkan, Shechina b'tachtenim again, Osi l'migdash v'shachanti b'seichel. To bring the Shechina down below, and that's what they did. It was temporary. It would then lead to the Bayis Rishon, Bayis Sheni, but they were destroyed, also due to sins. And that's the avodah of the thousands of years since then. We are refining the world to prepare it for the Gula Amitis Vashem, and this time it will be a permanent presence of V'shachanti B'seichem, of Dira B'tachtenim. So the Rebbe, in the Maamar Tavshin Yud Aleph, explains that we are the 7th generation from the Alter Rebbe, like Moshe was the 7th generation from Avraham Avinu. To finish the job, being the last generation of Golus, the first generation of the Gula, our job is to bring Vayikra Keil Elam, to cause, not just to cry out there's God, but to cause others to cry out, basically to bring godliness to every corner of this world. And this became the Rebbe's mission statement of the Deira Shvi, the finishing touches of bringing the Gula. As we see, the Rebbe accelerated that. If you go to the Rebbe's later sikhs, talking about the late 80s, and Tavshin Nun, and Tavshin Memches, Memtes, Nun, Nun Aleph, Nun Beis, Le'esata, what we heard from the Rebbe was, Otot, this is it. We finished the job, the Birurim are finished. So this lays out the Maamar Basi L'Gani, the very essential work, what it consists of. What is that going to consist of? How do you build a Mishkan? So he said a Mishkan is made up of Aseh Shittim, of the cedar wood that we build, the pillars, the kroshim. And he explains what does that mean in Pnimius, in Avodah. Shittim from the word shtus. We take the shtus, the insanity, the craziness of this corrupt material world, of the umazeh, and turn it into shtus the kedusha. We take the sheket of this world, the falsity, the deceptiveness, the duplicity, and we turn sheket into kesher, into keresh, into kroshim, the pillars, the beams of the Mishkan. So it's the transformation of through iskafia and ishapcha, as he puts it, by refraining and then transforming the material world into a Mishkan, into a dira b'leis bara b'tachtenim. Who does it? Sivus Hashem, the soldiers of God. We are the soldiers of Hashem. As in this week's parsha boy, Basi L'Gani is connected to parsha boy. If the original maamar was said in Tov Pei Gimel, also connected to parsha boy, Sivus Hashem. And he explains what Sivus Hashem means, the different meanings in Sivus Hashem, the 3 meanings, all signifying the work that we, as the soldiers, fight the battles against the corrupt, dark world of shtus, the lu'umazeh, and of sheker, and the falsities of this world, and the duplicity, to transform it into a home for God. So the first 10 chapters covers that avodah. Talks about karbonos, talks about nefesh habamis, talks about how you transform it, firstly personally and also collectively in the whole world. The last 10 chapters address the keiches we have. How can you do such a job? It's not an easy job to do. You're dealing with quite a formidable enemy here. A world that's busy with its own material interests. And I don't think anyone needs to elaborate, but we can elaborate. Look at the world today. Look at the world all over these thousands of years. A dark world, a corrupt world, a decadent world. Erves ha'aretz, starting from Mitzrayim, but through all the generations. Today, yes, in some areas there's been advancements, but you still have a moral compass lacking. Again, materialism. So where do we get the strength for this? So he goes on, the last 10 chapters is where we get the strength. And he begins with a mashal. That when an army, a military goes out to fight, the leader, the king, gives them resources. But in order to conquer an enemy, he doesn't just give them regular resources. He gives them the deepest resources. What he calls midas hanetzach and midas hanetzach. What are the deepest resources? These are the exile, the treasures that no one has ever seen, that the king has gathered and collected over the years and remain in his vaults, hidden, concealed from any eye. And also the treasures of his parents and grandparents. So you can imagine what kind of treasures they are. And when it comes to fighting a battle, and he explains not to conquer land, or loot, or booty, or resources. Simply to win the enemy, he will splurge, bizbuz ha'etzes, he'll splurge these treasures just to win this victory. Because midas hanetzachon is rooted in the deepest levels of the soul. What does this mean, Lamaila? Lamaila means that when it comes to make adira b'tachtenim, you're dealing with an enemy. Tachtenim, as the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 36, means not lowest only in space, but lowest in spiritual stature. That the divine is completely concealed till the point of cheshach kafla mechupel, a quadruple darkness, moli klipas v'sitra achra, filled with all kinds of forces, with the tzaddikim, where the shoyim gevrim by, he says that in chapter 6, but shoyim, the wicked prosper, the righteous suffer. Very, very difficult world. That is where he wants a dira, a home. Not just a place passing through, a home. Not silas. Lamata mata, as the Rebbe explains in Tov Shin Yud Aleph, the significance of that. And for that, he gives out these eitzes. What is the eitzah lamaila? He says, Eir ein sof is lamaila maila aden ketz lamata mata aden tachlis. The deepest levels of divine energy. And he begins first by explaining lamata mata aden tachlis, as the Rebbe says in this year's Maim in 1966, this year's, meaning corresponding to this year's chapter. Frier the Anplekte und danach the Behaltene. Now first he gives them the revealed resources. That's why he begins with Lamata Mata. Like the king will give the soldiers, the military, weapons, tools, strategy, revealed. But then, once you get that, then you come to the deeper. Lamai Lamada and Kes, that's the Eitzir. That's the treasures that are hidden. That's the Helam Achet Helam. That's not the revealed faculties. That's the Bahaltana. The things that nobody has ever seen before. And that he begins to discuss in chapter 15 and now continuing in chapter 16. So chapters 12, 13, 14 are about Lamata Mata Aden Tachlis, the Anplekta, the divine energy that we receive. Think of the intelligence we have, our emotions, our wisdom, all the strategies that we can employ. These are all divine strengths that we're given. But then come new strengths, unprecedented, that are not only never revealed, they're fundamentally beyond being revealed. They're what he calls be'etzem, sosum be'etzem. Not just because you haven't accessed it yet. It's inaccessible. And yet, paradoxically, it's given specifically because this is all rooted in atzmus, in the highest levels. But the chiddush in this chapter 16, the Rebbe says, and again, we're going to talk about this more next week, more at length, because I see with the time allotted, I'm not going to be able to go over everything. But the Rebbe explains that there's a chiddush in this week's chapter, in this year's chapter. That it's not just that lamay aden ketz is the strengths that are concealed and reflect the divine power to conceal, which is deeper than the power to reveal, which is lamata mata aden tachlis. Like he says, mechadish, that's not two separate tracks. It's all b'mokem echad, in Eid Ein Sof, that in the consciousness, divine consciousness. Because you could say the conceal, okay, that's the koyach ha'atzmus is beyond us, and God is giving that to us. No, He's giving it to us also within the very framework of our conscious existence. That's the chiddush of this chapter. And that allows us the power to fight the battles that we need to fight. So the essence of chapter 16 is all about that. One of the interesting things we have is that not every year the Rebbe actually wrote notes of what he wanted to say, what he's going to say in the maamar. So we actually have the notes. I'm looking at it right now, the Rebbe's actual handwriting. So this is very short. It's like Rosh Prokim. It's just very short bullet points. But in the maamar, the Rebbe elaborates, and his main chiddush is that it's not the power of Yechelis, it's not God's infinite or beyond infinite capacity that we're accessing here. Because that's something that's beyond us. That's not something you can call an oitzer. You can't call that a treasure that's being given to soldiers to fight a battle, as the Rebbe says. That's not something that you can pass on. It can be originating there, but it's not something that relates to us. When it's an Eid Ein Sof, means it's relating to us. So this very Helam, even though it's completely beyond, at the same time, he's giving it to us on our terms. And the whole maamar goes on to explain, and the Rebbe brings from all the Rabbeim different ways of explaining how even though it's completely beyond, nevertheless, it's something that has an effect on us. So the chiddush here is to say that Atzmus gives us strength, that is definitely a great thing. But to say that that strength also is on our terms, and that's Eid Ein Sof, with is a maila and is a mato, l'maila maila den kes, l'mata mata den tachlis, which are two different terms. L'maila maila l'mata mata, as the Rebbe says in the maamar, he emphasizes, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe emphasizes it as well, that these are yesh hefresh gadol beineihem, that even though they're both in Eid Ein Sof, there's a big difference. So we're talking about a world where there's a difference between these two tracks. And yet, they're both given to us. That tells us that even in our, we'll call it Metzias Nimtzen, our tzir of existence, our structure of existence, on the highest levels we have these strengths, which makes it so much ours, so much more ours. That means it becomes part of who we are, not just something, a divine power that remains completely beyond us. That, in essence, is the chiddush of this chapter 16. And he goes on to explain what that means, both in the context of the anplekta, is like the makif hakorev, that when a teacher teaches a student, there's always something that remains above his head, but that's still accessible. Then there's a level that's not accessible, and even that becomes part of the student as well. That's the maila maila aden kes. And how does it become part? He says there are things that can be expressed in intelligence, expressed in sipurim, in stories. He brings from the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid to explain that. As I said, more details I'll discuss in the next program. But the essence, what the bottom line, punchline from all of this is that we need to take away that we have tremendous resources. But not just resources mitzad kol yochel, mitzad yechelis of the Eibishter. That would be still, God is giving that. When it comes to an enemy, God is splurging those tremendous resources, those treasures. No, we're getting treasures that even in the world, in our world, that are completely inaccessible in any normal way, even that becomes part of our existence. So it means that we can touch and have an experience of the divine that's beyond the beyond in our very lives. That makes the dira b'tachtenim so much more internalized. I elaborated, of course, at length in my talk, in this class I gave on this, I mentioned before in the whole Torah, but I hope that does some justice to it. But because of this elaboration right now, I am not able to continue. I wanted to talk about a whole bunch of other things, and I see we're not going to have the time to do so. But so be it. We will continue. I will continue definitely next week discussing this in more detail. I'll just say one thing. One of the questions that was asked is, why do we say, like he says right at the beginning of the Basi L'Gani, why are all sevenths beloved when the number 8 represents a higher transcendent level? Kol Shvi Chavivin. And we always hear Shmeina, Shemer Saheke from the Rashba. So I was thinking about it in this context, because like this, what we just discussed, the goal here is not just to have a transcendent Shmeina. The goal is that the transcendent should come into our structure. So if you only had Shmeina, okay, beautiful. But that it comes also into Shivin, that even Shvi, even in the structure of the seven cycle of 7 days or 7 spheres, 7 emotions, that you even have that as Chaviv, means even in the world of Eid Ein Sof, you also have an element Lamai Ad Ein Ketz, not just beyond the Eid Ein Sof. So I thought that maybe that can explain it. But there's many more questions what these treasures are today and how they manifest, and a lot of interesting questions that I definitely want to discuss. But thank God we have another week to do that, so we will do that. With that, I will conclude here this week's program, My Life Chassidus Applied. This was episode 577. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone have a very good Geula Dike and Skashus Dike Chodesh Shevat, Yud Shevat, preparations to Yud Shevat, to maybe do our part to finish the job of the Deir HaShvi, Shvi and Chavivin, and bring down the Shechina down below, and be zeichet to the Geula Hamitis V'Ashlema even before the Chodesh Shevat.
This program is brought to you by My Life, Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.